I feel like I'm the strongest candidate when it comes to like federal agencies and trying to work through the bureaucracies that way.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a record with that of getting accomplishments done.
How do we actually kind of look down 20 years down the road and say, hey, how do we invest in something that's innovative that can help relieve traffic in a way that we haven't thought of yet?
I would really like to zero in and focus on St. George.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I can bring those skill sets here to St. George.
From the Blue Form Media Studios, this is the 435 Podcast, the pulse of Southern Utah.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the 435 Podcast. I'm your host, Robert McFarland. Over the next several episodes, guys, we're going to be doing a deep dive into the 2025 municipal elections. Mayors and city council members from all over Southern Utah are going to be seeking your vote in helping shape the future of our cities. So this is the place that you're going to be able to get one-on-one conversations with all the candidates to help you make the best decision for you come election season. So please make sure you like and subscribe, share it with other voters throughout Washington County, and make sure they have the information they need to make the decisions that are going to be best for us in the county. We hope you enjoy this episode and this series of episodes, guys. We'll see you out there. Bryan Thiriot, you're running for St. George City Council.
Yes, I am.
You've ran before.
I have.
You said you ran in 2015?
I ran in 2015, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot's changed.
I made it to the general in that election.
You made it there. Was there as many candidates? Because I think right now there's, for St. George City, I think there's 8 candidates.
I think something like that.
8, something like that.
Yeah.
Last year or 2 years ago when we covered the local elections, there were 16.
Yeah, that was
like right out of the gate, but then a few dropped out right early on.
That was a lot of candidates.
That was a lot of candidates.
Yeah.
And then in some cities, there's no candidates. What do you think fires up people to run for the local municipal stuff?
Or not run?
Yeah.
Right? So I think a lot of it is items that affect them personally. There's a big component that people want to just contribute.
Mm-hmm.
Bryan Thiriot, I was born and raised here in St. George. I'm 5 generations in this community, so I've grown up around it. I was educated here at Dixie High School, Dixie College. That's where I met my wife.
Nice.
And so I think there's a drive for people who want to better their community.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, my drive is to make sure that I leave it better for the next generations. Because thank you to the first generations that came in and had that vision, that original vision, Dixie, out there by Encampment Mall on the Utah Tech University campus. You know, they kind of plotted it all out here for St. George, and we're beneficiaries of that today.
Well, it's interesting because, you know, that original vision, Dixie, I've talked about it on the podcast a lot, from a lot of different perspectives and angles. And, you know, the city didn't grow. It was basically the same from the 1950s all the way probably until about the 90s. And even as we got the freeway that came through in the 70s, we had some growth. You had Bloomington start to grow. But this idea that they wanted to be able to create a community to where their kids could stay in, right? And it's like, well, if we're not growing, we're just exporting our best, you know, valuable, you know, piece of our culture. They end up going somewhere else, and hopefully they can come back. But there wasn't very many jobs. You know, the economic diversity wasn't there. And so you had this original Vision Dixie, and correct me if you think I'm a little bit off, but you had this original Vision Dixie was to figure out a way to create jobs, create growth in a way that would allow, you know, our posterity to continue living in St. George. I moved here in 2015, so I've been here 10 years, and I've seen this massive growth. Do you think it still matches? Is that still that Vision Dixie? We're beneficiaries of that, but how do you see that kind of growing forward? Do you feel like the growth has started to outpace what that original vision was?
I don't think so. I think what it really comes down to is, like, I'm going to give you personal experience, like my own mother, right?
Yeah.
So my grandmother graduated from Dixie High School.
Mm-hmm.
My mother graduated from Dixie High School. I graduated from Dixie High School, and my kids and sons getting ready to graduate from Dixie High School. My mother, she immediately, once she graduated from high school, attended Dixie College, graduated from there, traveled up to Utah State to go to school there.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, came back and couldn't find any jobs here. She had a teaching degree, so she headed straight to Las Vegas, hour and a half away, right? That's where the jobs were. And then that's actually where I kind of grew up a little bit, was in Las Vegas. And then at 6th grade, my mom said to my dad, we're moving back to St. George. And my mom got reemployed back to East Elementary. She was a kindergarten teacher there.
Nice. Loved
it. And so see how that vision, allowed us to come back. And I think it's still there today.
Yeah.
I think on the top of my mind right now is that there's a lot of innovation that happens right here within our community.
Mm-hmm.
And I would really love to see Innovation District evolve.
Mm-hmm.
And that's with the university.
Yeah.
And because we have Innovation Plaza,
mm-hmm.
and let's kick it up another notch so that the next and future generations can have greater opportunities here today.
Yeah, I think of the pioneering spirit of the people that settled the area is that they were innovators and thinking outside of their we were so far away from civilization, if you will, right? When they first settled the area, and it required just this type of person that could think outside the box, get creative with their environment, and really push the limits and be innovative. And I feel like that spirit still continues to kind of come through as generations have gone on. So I think you're right. I think that's a good add to it.
One innovative product that we all benefit from today that started right here in St. George, the TV.
Yeah.
With Philo T. Farnsworth.
Okay.
The bulb.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, wow. That's crazy. I didn't even think about that.
So it's here.
Yeah, it's here.
And we can amplify it here.
Yeah. So take me to, what are the kind of pillars that you're running on? Obviously, there's 2 incumbents. They're rerunning, Natalie Larson and Michelle Tanner. What are you trying to, when you look at the mix of the city council, what are you trying to bring to the city council that you might feel is lacking or feel like you can add to it?
So right away, I can bring local government experience. As the former director of 5 County Association of Governments, I worked with 39 communities on a daily basis here in the region, worked in their budgets, everything, right? And so I would really like to zero in and focus on St. George. Mm-hmm. And I know I can bring those skill sets here to St. George. 2 is I spent 15 years working in Washington, D.C., Salt Lake, and back in St. George for 2 U.S. senators. Mm-hmm. So I feel like I'm the strongest candidate when it comes to like federal agencies and trying to work through the bureaucracies that way.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a record with that of getting accomplishments done.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the biggest. 2 is I grew up here.
Mm-hmm.
I lived in Dixie Downs right over here. I remember when we had the horse tracks over here, and I'd watch the jockeys get out and race, and now it's, moved over to purgatory. But anyway, I feel like I have that flavor too. And 3 is I have an educational level. I was committed, Eagle Scout. So when I say I do something, I do it, I commit it, and I accomplish it.
Yeah.
And that's a skill set and desire that I believe I can bring to the St. George City Council.
Yeah. So as the executive director for the 5 counties, tell me, what does that job kind of entail? What's the purpose for somebody who's listening that's like, I don't even know what this is? What is the 5 counties and what's the mission there, and what'd you accomplish over there?
So the mission there, quite a few accomplishments, which was really good. I mean, when I was first hired 12 years ago, one of our programs, the HEAT Assistant Program, the state of Utah was coming in wanting to take it away. And
the HEAT Assistant Program?
Home Energy Assistant Target Program.
Okay.
It's a social program.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a benefit for one-time use for those who qualify for a utility assistance,
mm-hmm.
right? St. George City is a player in that too,
mm-hmm.
and it helps out. And it helps out a lot of your seniors.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And so that program, I went right to work, and we turned that into the top program in the state. In fact, the state actually uses the model of 5 County for all the other programs throughout.
Cool.
The other program that I'm excited about when I was at 5 County was the local administrative advisor program, because there's a lot of cities who do not have city managers or administrative staff, and so they're really small.
Like
and
Leeds
yes.
is one. It's like the mayor
Yes.
does everything.
Yes,
You
yes.
know?
And in fact, Leeds is one. And 2 years ago, the state of Utah, Governor Cox put together the local administrative advisor program. And so we would go in and basically consult with budgeting, with human resource, with land use, all of those items. And guess what? The state of Utah now wants to duplicate throughout the rest of the state the 5 County program for the local
cool.
administrative advisor.
Yeah, that's an important role, because it's weird when you have this city of a certain size where budgets don't make sense, but they still deal with all of the same issues that a lot of cities deal with in managing all their resources and city planning and all that stuff. You don't always get the person that raises their hand isn't always the most equipped to be able to manage budgets and do all of those things. You'd hope, but
we were there just to assist.
Yeah.
My excitement through all of that is that the state of Utah recognized what 5 County was doing and now wants to duplicate it throughout the rest of the
awesome.
state. So,
That's cool. So then,
anyway, we're models down here.
Yeah,
We said it.
yeah. So when you see that collaborative effort, within the 5 counties, looking at just Washington County, we need a lot of, the 5 cities, the main cities that make up Washington County, they need to collaborate quite a bit together. So you feel like you're pretty equipped to manage that.
Yeah. And part of that too is transportation, right? So the Dixie Metropolitan Planning Organization, I was the executive director for that for 12 years. So I read through the contracts, the budgets, all of that. And of course you have an executive committee of your mayors and city council and county commissioners that are the body of that. And it's nice for a road to go from Washington City through St. George to connect into Ivans and Santa Clara.
Yeah. So thinking, now that you brought up transportation, you brought this flyer in.
Yeah, I brought this flyer in because I think it's very important to kind of highlight and get out.
Yeah, I don't know if you could see it, but it's a flyer, just a standard flyer from UDOT. There's a public comment period open from June 18th to July 7th about the underpass that's going to go from Flood Street or 400 East across I-15 or underneath I-15.
Underneath
I-15 and connect to 900
That's right.
South.
That's actually right over in my neighborhood. So I just received that flyer yesterday.
And it doesn't really give a whole lot of explanation as to, it doesn't communicate very well what exactly that they're trying to do. At the top it says St. George Boulevard to Bluff Street. And it's like, St. George Boulevard, it's already connected to Bluff Street. So so thinking of messaging, what do you think about transportation? It seems like if you get on St. George word of mouth, or if you just drive traffic wise at 3:00 on River Road or something like that, the traffic has definitely increased, especially in the last 10 years that I've been here. What do you see as traffic solutions or transportation solutions that you either have worked on in the past or seen where we could do things a little bit different in St. George? Have you thought about that at all?
So I've driven in Washington D.C.
Yeah.
I'll take St. George traffic any day.
Yeah.
Also,
I know what you mean.
So
it's all relative.
It's relative. It really is relative. But when it does come to a pinch point, it does hurt. You're trying to get across town to get your kids to soccer or wherever you need to go. Work. And I think a lot of it too is that allow the Dixie Metropolitan Planning Organization. They have long range plans. Let's find the funding to get those going.
Yeah.
Right. A lot of them. Let's find the funding, and I'm going to bring it up. We really desperately need the Northern Corridor.
Okay.
So, because how many of us want to be, a parking lot on the St. George Boulevard trying to get across from east to west or west to east?
Yeah, we covered that quite a bit. If you go back to our episodes, I interviewed the county attorneys, the director of Conserve Southwest Utah, the main organization that's pushing back against the corridor. I've talked to Celeste Malloy about it. It's an interesting topic because me personally, I'm not quite sure that it's going to solve a whole lot of problems as far as what's currently happening. But as future growth continues to happen, which Private land, people are going to develop private land in Washington County. Only 11% of the whole county is privately owned, so there's only so much space that we're going to actually be able to build on at the moment. But thinking about future infrastructure of saying, okay, we need certain roads to connect to not make the already current kind of tight, whether it's Green Springs or whether it's St. George Boulevard. How do we relieve any future more congestion that happens there? Right? Is that the kind of the way that you look at it?
It's valves that releases the pressure. On it. Yeah.
What do you think about public transportation though? It's tough to get. I have a hard time getting elected people talking about public transportation because it's a net cost. It never makes money. No city in the world have I ever found where public transportation is like, oh yeah, it pays for itself at least, right? It may not make money, but
this is where I got to push back on you and say it actually did pay for itself.
Okay.
For the bus system in St. George.
Okay.
Have you ever flown out of the St. George airport?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's awesome.
And you like it?
I love it.
Okay. That wouldn't have happened had St. George City not had a bus system through the federal government.
Okay.
All right. So there's my pushback on you is that thank you to those leaders back in the time that established a bus system that allowed us to check a box so that we could get the airport relocated out to where it is today.
Okay, so the bus system was contingent, or the airport was contingent upon the busing system.
Yeah, that was a check the box.
But I would also say the bus system, even though we check the box, does the bus system really work?
Yeah, that's the bigger question, right?
Yeah.
So, when I see it, there's definitely people on it. The thing I feel bad about, I don't use it, but the thing I feel bad about is there's money that's unspent that really needs to be spent on the bus shelters.
Yeah.
We know how hot it is.
We don't have most of them don't have benches.
Yes.
And almost none of them have covers.
And how hot it is outside in St. George, and then when it rains, it pours. And so I'd be a councilman that would kind of start pushing on that and saying, let's get those accomplished around here.
Well, and part of me thinks, is there something greater that we can invest in? If we look at, I wasn't an advocate of the GO bond, not because I didn't agree with what the GO bond was going to do, because I love the parks, I love the trails. I want to see us invest in the parks and trails.
Sure.
I'm just specifically me doing a general obligation bond, and the way that it was marketed out was, hey, this is the amount of money we want because it's not going to raise taxes. Right. And so because of what we were paying before, this amount of money is going to allow us to keep paying what everybody's paying, but also allow this budget increase to be able to continue to fund the parks. And my argument, and this was private, I don't think I've ever said it on the show, is like, why don't we double that? Like, why wouldn't the community, if they really do love the parks and trails and the public spaces that we have, which was an overwhelming majority of St. George City was in favor of the GO bond. I think it was like 60 or 70% voted for it. We did just enough to keep what we kind of have going, but we're not thinking out a little bit bigger. We like all the nice features within the parks, but I think of having a trail system that could be a partial public transportation system. Like how do we actually kind of look down 20 years down the road and say, hey, how do we invest in something that's innovative that can help relieve traffic in a way that we haven't thought of yet? Have you ever thought about like different public transportation styles or anything like that?
Yeah, those are great questions. It's transportation is key to all of us here.
Yeah.
Especially from I-15 to get into our homes and work.
Yeah.
What's interesting though is when that first RAP tax, recreation, arts and parks, when that first came about, I think it only won by 51%.
Yeah.
So if you're saying it's like 60, 65%, it's definitely increased now.
Well, because there was the RAP tax, I think is county. Is that county?
Yeah.
And then the GO bond was just St. George City. St. George.
Yeah.
And so thinking of just St. George and what's changed in the people that have come here is my wife and I, when we first moved here, that was our favorite part. I was like, there's trails everywhere. And then everywhere you look, there's vistas, and then there's the river trails and all these things. It's part of why we really love it here. And I think that's what's happened with a lot of the people that have moved in is that's what's drawn them into the area, and that's the kind of quality of life that they want, and they want to continue that.
Yeah.
So,
and let me speak to that further. So as a teenager, I just lived off of Main Street. In fact, I live in my family home.
Cool.
My kids are being grown up in the same home that I grew up in.
That's awesome.
And it's a lot of fun that way because I can always tell them stories of this is what your uncle did here, and all of that. But as a teenager, where the McDonald's is on Bluff Street, I remember I was carrying one of my friends, and I was on Bluff Street, and I got hit by a car and slid off to the side of the road. I got back up, fortunately.
You were on your bike.
I was on my bike, right? That's the last time I ever rode a bike on Bluff Street.
I'll bet. Yeah.
So the next time I ride a bike is, when I'm going over to Dixie Drive from Main Street, and St. George City just connected the trail underneath Bluff Street there.
Yeah.
That was wonderful.
Yeah.
Because I could go right under. I never even had to even touch Bluff Street.
Yeah.
So that's a quality of life that's absolutely amazing.
So you're in favor of like the bike
something.
lanes and that bike transportation?
I love that bike trail.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So let's transition. So there's lots of different things I think people have concerns about development. About 70% of city council job is land use. What are your thoughts on the current downtown plan? If you think about the downtown plan and the rezoning, that they proposed with the Lively District and the City Connect to kind of give us, a little bit of ability to rezone downtown and upzone downtown. What are your thoughts on that? And what do you think?
So it's kind of different. It's changing,
Yeah.
The sixth grade center is no longer there. It's the school board, right, building there. So when I was a child growing up, that's where you went to school for sixth grade.
Yeah.
And that's changed. A lot of it's changing. City Hall is now downtown. I love it that it's across the street from the Main Street, the plaza there. And so you're starting to see that. Washington County, they've, said they planted their flag. The St. George is the county seat, and so we're going to make sure that the county building's right here too.
Yeah.
And what's interesting as you say that is the question I have is I want to make sure that future generations have opportunities here too.
Yeah.
I live in downtown.
Yeah.
I love it there. My wife and I 3 years ago we said we were going to add on to our house and do an accessory dwelling unit. All right. The city kind of changed the rules as we were going through it, saying you couldn't go build as high, but it took us 3 years to get our addition, but we did accomplish it.
Yeah.
And so that's actually really so my wife's parents can come and visit from Ogden and just be part of it.
Yeah.
It's exciting to see when a race happens, like the St. George Marathon race. When that happens, you see all these racers just kind of walking throughout all of the communities.
Yeah.
And housing's very important, for the area there. Now, when it first established, so my mom was a Bracken.
Okay.
And the Brackens, when they drew out their lot, they had a lot for 200 East and 100 South. But my family there said they're not staying there. They're going up to Pine Valley. And so that's where they settled. So I still look at the old homestead in that area there. And I'm like, that's where they plotted it out, you know. And a lot of the infrastructure downtown was irrigation. Led, right?
Yep.
There's still irrigation water,
There's
right?
still some down there,
still come down through the middle of town.
Yep.
My aunts, my uncles, my grandparents were there, and so I love it. I don't want to see a lot of high rises, but I think we do need some, but not a lot.
When you say high rise, what do you think is a high rise?
So high rise, 6-7 stories high.
Yeah.
I was just up north in an area called West Haven. Do you know that West Haven?
It sounds super
It's
familiar.
in Weber County, right?
Okay. It's in Weber.
And so my wife grew up in Marriott, and West Haven's just adjacent to it, and a lot of the farmers, they've now sold their property, and so it's not agriculture. It's like 6 and 7 story high density areas.
Yeah.
They used to be agriculture.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't want that.
Yeah. That's not your jam.
That's not it.
There's
That's not.
There's a interesting Stacy Young. He's the governmental affairs director. I don't know if you know Stacy with the Southern Utah Home Builders Association.
No.
So Stacy did a thought experiment. We had it on the podcast. We talked about it. He said if you took the average density of Europe, which is about a 5-story building, and you applied that to Washington County, you could fit everybody in the county from basically the Black Ridge, where the old airport was, to the river.
Mm-hmm.
And that triangle that's right there from the river and the freeway. It would fit. You could fit the whole county in just that space, which would leave the rest of the county completely open space, right? And so obviously that's not what everybody wants. Not everybody here wants to live in a 5-story building. But it's interesting to see that kind of a density when you look at our population and we look at conserving this open spaces that we have, is finding that balance in between, and that the difference between low density, medium density, and high density. And I don't think anybody, I bet you there's probably only 10% of the county maybe that would be okay with 6 and 7-story buildings in downtown St. George. But finding that balance. And do you think they've accomplished a little bit of that have you seen the zoning map for the downtown?
Yeah. And to speak to zoning, I know that St. George City, they plan to update their general plan, right?
Yeah,
I think it's this Thursday, and I'm going to give them kudos to that. There's a lot of people that invested a lot of time and energy and thought and probably considerable thought into what this document's going to be. And so I would want it to go for a couple of years before I even looked at it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's the idea with the general plan, right? Is that it's the long-term plan, but it's not going to change overnight. Right.
When you talk about open space too, you got to go back to 2009, right? Washington County had a Washington County Growth and Conservation Act that was passed through Congress, and it set aside quite a bit of land for wilderness, conservation areas. We got the Beaver Dam conservation area, the Red Cliffs conservation area.
Yeah, we can't build.
You can't
those
build, right?
The tortoises, they run development. It's there. Yeah,
it's there. And anyway, a lot of open spaces have been set aside.
Yeah.
Is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Now, one thing that I have learned that I want to share with your groups and your guests is that trust lands, right, that are sections throughout each county. Back when President Biden was trying to get the Bears Ears, there was a proposed exchange so that all of the trust lands that were in that national monument were going to be exchanged out throughout the state. Washington County was going to get quite a few of those. It didn't happen, right?
That's right.
It did not happen. But the one thing that I learned from the director of trust lands, is that she said, if any county wants to come to me and do an administrative blocking of trust lands, come work with me.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that not only St. George, but the other cities within the county and the county itself could look at doing.
Yeah.
Is blocking up the trust lands, right, to these growth areas that we have, these pockets, and kind of helping with the housing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this is the first time we had Kyle Paisley on. So if you're listening to this episode, going back to listen to Kyle Paisley, and we talked a lot about, we did 2 parts with him to try to chunk them down into a little bit smaller parts.
I wish you would ask him that question though. Like, hey, how do we do that administratively?
So yeah. And the exact how to do it administratively, I think he expressed his frustrations with the Biden administration and the Bureau of Land Management, saying that they were going to do this trade that they haven't gotten done. And the biggest challenge is that his focus is, that we have to maximize the amount of money that we can get for the school and institutional trust mission, which
that is their mission,
to bring money for the schools, right? And the schools get a significant, I think the average school gets $80,000 a year from the school and institutional land trust management, the financial management of that money. And about 80% of the money that they've gotten over the last 10 years has come from Washington County. Did you know that? 80% of the revenue that they've been able to bring
It's
in.
all the subdivisions that they've developed.
Well, it's Desert Color. There's dozens of them throughout county, and our population growth has allowed them to really bring in a big money generator. So I do think that's something that we can continue to do. And
I'm just trying to say here that there's tools and mechanisms that
for sure.
could be blocked up even more.
Yeah, I think so too. And then utilizing those on the affordable housing. But even then, do you feel like affordable housing can be done just by building our way out of it? Or do you feel like there's other ways that we can help with the affordable housing?
I don't think you can build your way out of it. You're just never going to attain that.
Yeah.
And let me give you an example, right? Just a personal.
That's an honest answer, because I'm not quite sure we can build our way out of it either.
You can't.
Yeah.
And
governor would say differently, but
I'm not here running against the governor.
Yes,
I'm just
fair enough.
Economics here, basic economics, market, supply, demand, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
When I have family members calling me saying, "Hey, I'm retired. I just retired as an ER doctor from Louisiana, and I want to move to St. George," and I'm like, "You could go anywhere in the world, and you want to come to St. George, okay?"
Yeah.
Plus, I have high school classmates that are calling saying, "I'm ready to move back now to St. George."
Yeah.
Right. So it's there, but I fundamentally want to make sure that the next generations have greater opportunities than what we've had here.
Yeah.
And one thing I think we need to talk about is water.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, we can talk about growth and all of that, but you have to know water.
Yeah.
And that's another expertise that I can bring to the St. George City Council that I don't think any of the other candidates have.
Mm-hmm.
In that I've filed for water. I've been thrown to a hearing by the BLM saying that we can't access BLM land to access our own water that we filed for. Mm-hmm. Well, guess what? We went to a hearing, we won, and now the BLM and we have a great working relationship now.
Yeah.
And so when I do a right-of-way for our family ranch, it took me 3 months to get that accomplished.
Wow. Okay.
And so that's items that I could bring immediately to the people of St. George on the city council.
Well, let's talk about just for a minute just the water. So, you talk to Zach Renstrom, you look at their 20-year plan. We have the reuse system that's coming online, the proposal for the water treatment, expansion of the water treatment plant. What do you think we're on the right track? Are we in a significant? Do you see us running out of water? What's your thoughts on water in general?
I don't see us running out of water. But you're talking to a guy who, our family, we kind of our area to go to is out on the west side of the desert here.
Yeah.
2005, the Beaver Dam wash was flooded, right?
Yep.
You remember maybe you've
I've
read
heard
the history,
of it.
right?
I've heard about it. Yeah.
The 2005 flood, it came through, and it was a great water year that year, but it was also a flood that year as well. And at that time, the Beaver Dam was in Nevada. It was a dam. It was retaining all of this water, but the state of Nevada had to breach that water and that dam so that the water could come through, and they've never rebuilt the dam. And so all that water is just coming on the west side of the county right now. And St. George City, back in the 90s, filed for water rights. They still haven't finished them.
Wow.
And that's something that I would work on.
On the west side?
On the west side.
On the west side.
On the west side.
And that, because they have to go through the federal government, right? The Department of the Interior to get that stuff?
The state of Utah Water Rights Department.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because it's on, but
resource.
Is that the land that the water's falling on? I wonder how that works. I guess we don't have to talk about that, but yeah, I think water's one of these difficult conversations, because you hear there's a little bit of a fear that you get out of the media that we're running out of water. I had a client call me just 2 weeks ago, and their concern is like, hey, I was reading this article about water, and St. George not going to have enough water, and you've seen USA Today, or I've seen a bunch of different. ABC did a piece on Southwest Utah and how we were running out of water. And when you talk to Zach, it seems like we have a really good plan. Obviously, a Lake Powell pipeline would be the magic wand that would fix all the issues, but there's
for a
other
while,
ways,
right?
For a while.
because
there's the population growth, right? Is going to continue.
2050, we're going to have 500,000 people in the county, right?
Yeah.
250, 300,000 are going to be right here in St. George. We're at 110 right now in St. George.
Yeah.
So I always go back, right? Back in the day when I was in high school, there was only 2 high schools.
Yeah.
There was Dixie High School and Pineview, and that was it. And now we have all these others high schools that have added on.
It'll be interesting to see what we look like when we got that many people around here. So
but as a realtor yourself, I'm sitting here going, I have family members, friends that they're trying to find their way back into this community here.
Yeah, my argument is that the demand is infinite. Actually, if you really look at it, you're like, of course, people are going to want to buy a house here. You know, whether it's a first-time home buyer or whether it's a retiree, there's a million different reasons why somebody would want to buy here, and the demand is capped only to the affordable ability for them to buy here in the houses that are available, right? And so, like you said before, I think I agree with you, is that I don't think we're going to ever build our way out of it. It's just how do we, once we build, that's what we get for a long time. You know, redevelopment's expensive, and it takes, you know, decades and decades for redevelopment to get put back into place. And so once we build it,
not only redevelopment, it took my wife and I 3 years to get the permitting to do an addition, right? And we had to end up going to what they call an auxiliary dwelling unit so that we could attach it to our house and go up, right?
Yeah.
So, and we also had limitations because we had high voltage power lines, but it took a while. And I just want the voters of St. George to know that I had the tenacity, the focus, and accomplishment that I can do great things on St. George City Council.
Cool, man. Well, anything else you want to leave us with? Any other thoughts that you have? Any other issues that you're looking at and saying, hey, this is part of my campaign. This is what I want to bring to St. George.
One thing I want to add, because I did bring up the airport, right? Yeah. And we have that airport because we had a bus system that allowed us to check the box, is that I'm excited to see that the airport's going to be having an expansion. You know, you have Zion National Park, lots of international visitors coming to, you know, see the park for the first time. And you have city of Las Vegas that's talking about actually separating their domestic flights from their international and moving it probably another 45 minutes away from downtown Las Vegas.
Interesting.
And so what I'm coming up to is that we have a control tower that's going to be coming on here in St. George. We've been the St. George airport. Now we're the regional airport. I think we need to really start looking at doing a feasibility of an international airport right here in our local area. You know, duty port free, items like that. You know, inland port, I think there's a lot of mechanics there economically that could be tied to an international airport. And we have folks coming from Canada all the time down here staying. Like they'd probably love a direct flight.
Yeah, they would for sure like that. I have
that would classify you as an international airport.
That's right.
And I think that would help to drive more economic development.
Yeah, and diversity within the economy. Yeah. It's a good idea. It's a good thought.
Yeah.
Okay, man. Well, good luck on the election.
Hey, thank you.
Primary elections are coming up.
Yep. August 12th.
August 12th. So make sure you're registered. If you're going to get a ballot in the mail, you gotta ask for it. You gotta ask for it now. They're not going to send it. Is it this one?
Actually, I called the election clerk of Washington County, and they are going to be mailing out
for this election.
But
the next one that they'll have to request.
They're mailing out for this election because I wanted that clarification, and I think it's either July 21st or July 22nd is when ballots will go out.
Oh, thanks for the info.
And Bryan D. Thiriot is at the bottom.
Bryan D. Thiriot.
Yep, and the D, you know, I'm a Dixie boy, so
Dixie guy.
Yes, I am.
Dot your I's, cross your T's, 2 T's,
exactly.
2 I's.
That's right.
Brian's at the bottom of the ballot.
Yep.
Check the box. Hope you guys enjoy this episode. We're going to continue doing as many interviews as the candidates. I've gotten probably 10 to 15 now, but we're going to cover all of Washington County, Washington City. They won't have a primary, but Santa Clara, Ivins, St. George, Hurricane. We're covering it all. Make sure you tune back in. Share this episode with a friend here locally. And Brian, good luck, man.
Thank you, Rob.
We'll see you out there.
All right.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thanks for listening in. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe. Make sure you're following us on all the social media websites. We love your support. We love the dialogue. We want to continue that going.
Find us at realestate435.com. We'd love to help you find a house here in town or help you get wherever you're going.